Okay, now let's try to add the login controller to the system. And this kind of controllers are used whenever the login request would come from some external web application like the React.js and the Angular. Okay, so for that reason, that let's try to introduce one of the controller over here. Okay, so here in this application, the backend application, I'm going to add the new controller, let's say user controller. And obviously I'm going to annotate this with the REST controller, and then it is going to become a controller, right? And here let me write the post mapping. Okay, the post mapping would be having a URL like this, that authenticate would be the URL, and here I'm declaring a method called public string do login, right? And this would have the request body that would come from the front end. So I'm writing request body, and that will have a login request or credentials, right? Let me write the login request. I'm going to create this class, the login request, that will be having a username and password. Okay, so login request, right? Okay, and once the login would be successful, that means the credentials would be checked with the backend. At that time, if it is success, then it will return the message that user login success. Okay, yeah, so this is the simple thing what we are going to do. Now let's create this login request class. Okay, so here just over the mouse and moving to the more action and selecting create class login request. Okay, and I'm going to create this class into, let's say, model. Okay, and let me click on OK. So here the class has been created. In this class, this is not the backend database class, so I'm not going to add the entity, and I'm just going to have two parameters like private string username, private string password. That's it. Okay, and we are going to have the corresponding getter and setter methods. Okay, so getter and setter methods are there. Okay, perfect. Now let's go back to the user controller. Okay, and now there is no error. Along with the REST controller, I must have to add the cross origin annotation, which we had done with the student controller also. So adding user controller and the same thing, that is a cross origin. Okay, and post mapping / authenticate. Right now, from here I should initiate the login request, backend login request. So for that, what I will be doing, that I'm going to use the reference of authentication. Going to create the object of authentication. Authentication is equal to Authentication Manager. I require to auto-wire the Authentication Manager first, then this is going to work. Okay, so let's add the auto-wire annotation for the Authentication Manager over here. Yeah, @auto-wire. Okay, and then I'm going to declare the Authentication Manager like this. Okay, Authentication Manager. This is what we require. Authentication Manager dot authenticate will allow us to do the authentication, and as an argument I have to provide the username, password authentication token, and this particular class is going to initiate the authentication process. So guys, if you can remember that the user provided username and password will go over here, okay, and backend information of the username and password would come from here, this user detail service, if you can recall. Okay, this one, this is the backend information. Okay, and here in the user controller, this is the front end information. Both would be matched by the Spring Boot, and if both are matching, then and then they will proceed ahead, otherwise not. Okay, so let me provide the two argument over here. Which are those? That is a login request dot get username comma login request dot get password. Okay, that's it, and let me end this with the semicolon. Okay, let me import this authentication so that we are not going to have any error. Okay, now once this is done, then once the authentication has been done, then we are going to add the student to the security context. Okay, so for that we are going to write security context holder dot get context dot set authentication, and here we are going to pass the authentication object that we have. Okay, that's it. Okay, so now here that it's possible that we will able to like intercept the login request over here, and will manually initiate the login request with the help of this. Okay, here you can see that this particular statement shows the error. So what we have to do, we have to create the bean of authentication manager, and that bean would be created inside the security config. So let's go to the security config, and there after the password encoder, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to click on the generate code, right, and let me click on the override method, and here there would be like authentication manager. Okay, this is the method which I'm going to override. What does it returns? It returns the authentication manager, and let's declare it as a bin, so that error will be resolved. Okay, so here you can see that we have successfully done this. Let's go back to the user controller. Now there should not be any error. Okay, and automatically that everything run successfully. Okay, so yes, don't worry, even though if this gives the error, right, once again it will execute it and it will run it successfully, as it is running successfully right now. Okay, so now what will happen, that my request will go from this particular controller, okay, or a endpoint. Okay, so how can I test that? So for that I am going to send the request through this particular URI, and we'll check that whether it is successfully authenticating or not. Okay, but before that, in the security config, if you can recall that I must have to provide permission to this authenticate URL, otherwise it is not going to work. Okay, so what I'm going to do, that here I'm going to add one more aunt measure, and that will have authenticate URL. Okay, and dot permit all. Okay, now my application should run successfully. Okay, so what I'll be doing, that I'm going to the VS Code, and there going to open this Thunder client, and going to have the new request. Now this new request would be http colon / localhost colon 8080 / authenticate. Okay, and the body, there would be a body where I have to provide the username and password. So the username is, let's say, username admin, which is already there in the backend. So username admin comma password, let's say password. Okay, colon password is also admin, right? Okay, and when I will click on the send, at that time it should return me the reply that the user login success, this one. Okay, so there is some error over here. Let me fix out this error. Can't configure aunt match after any request. Okay, yeah, so security config. Okay, and here let me cut this and I'm going to paste it after this. Okay, because this takes the precedence over this, because this is going to authenticate every request. Okay, and we require some like open access to few of the URLs, so that's why we have to keep it before, and after that we have to keep this any request dot authenticated. Okay, so now let's see that whether it runs successfully or not. Yes, it is running successfully. Okay, now let's go back over here and let me click on send. It should give me the message that the, yeah, it is giving me a message that, okay, sorry, this is the post mapping, so I must have to select post and clicking on send. Yeah, and I'm getting the message that is user login success. That means we have successfully implemented the controller so that we can intercept the login request and we can write a code whatever we want. That's it for this video.